take this as the chance you were looking for. Do not waste it.
$50,000. Look at me. Really look at me. You don't recognize me.
Atlanta. Autumn, 1999. The kind of autumn that bites. The leaves were already dead in the wealthy Buckhead district, curled up along the cobblestone gutters of Victoria Ashford Hayes' estate, like little brown warnings nobody cared to read. Inside the house, the marble foyer smelled of fresh-cut lilies and old money. The kind of money that doesn't ask for permission, that walks into rooms and expects them to rearrange themselves. The kind of money that has been in a family so long it has started to believe in itself. And inside that house, in a bedroom on the second floor that cost more than most people's mortgages, a woman was destroying herself in secret. Victoria Ashford Hayes was 31 years old, razor-thin, sharp-featured, with silver blonde hair that she wore pulled back so tight it looked like her face was being slowly winched into place. Her husband, Reginald Hayes, Reggie to his golfing buddies, the Hayes heir to the Atlanta business journals, was a real estate developer with a jaw that could cut contracts and a handshake that could seal a man's ruin. He was away that week in London, closing a deal. He had kissed her on the forehead at the airport and told her to hold the fort. He didn't know there was a war going on inside her. 7 months earlier, Victoria had made a mistake. A reckless, feverish, satin sheet mistake at a charity gala in a side room of the Piedmont Driving Club, with a man whose hands moved across the piano the way a sermon moves across a hungry congregation. His name was David Mercer. He was 42. He was black. And he was, by every reasonable measure, the most dangerous man Victoria had ever met. Not because he was cruel, but because he was true. He told her she was beautiful when she wasn't trying. He told her the truth when she didn't ask for it. He made her feel something her husband had stopped making her feel a long time ago, something she didn't even have the vocabulary for anymore. But it was a single night. One night. She had told herself it was just one night. Except now, 7 months later, she was lying in her own bed, in her own enormous house, in a maternity gown that smelled of disinfectant and shame, and the baby inside her was not Reggie's. The baby inside her was the color of mahogany. The baby inside her was the evidence of every sin Victoria had ever tried to keep neatly folded in the back of her closet. And the baby was coming. She had arranged everything. That was the thing about Victoria. She was good at arranging things. She was good at smiling through charity lunch-Fs while her stomach turned to acid. She was good at pretending her marriage was a love story and not a quarterly financial report. She was good at hiding. And so, when her water broke at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, she did not call her husband. She did not call her mother. She did not call an ambulance. She called Dr. Whitmore, a discreet obstetrician in Dunwoody who had been paid handsomely to forget the names of the women who came through his back door. The birth was fast. Too fast. The baby came out slick and squalling and angry, the way all healthy babies are angry. And the moment Dr. Whitmore held her up to the light, the room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with peace. The nurse, a young black woman named Patrice, who would not be named in any record and would be paid in cash the next morning, looked at Victoria. Victoria could not look back because the baby was beautiful. Deep brown skin, a head full of dark curls, and when she opened her eyes, just for a second, before the cry swallowed her whole, they were a startling, almost unnatural green. Victoria's green, David's shade of green, the cruelest possible reminder of both of them in one tiny body. "I can't keep her," Victoria whispered. Her voice sounded like something dragged out of a well. Dr. Whitmore, a man who had been through this particular horror before with wealthy clients, though never with a baby this clearly, this painfully out of place, nodded slowly. "I can have someone take her. There's a home in Macon, Catholic, very private. But Victoria, if your husband finds out, if the family finds out, this won't stay private for a year. You understand that." But Victoria wasn't listening anymore. She was looking at the baby. The baby was looking at her with those green eyes, those eyes And for one single traitorous second, Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. A feeling, a mother's feeling. A feeling that said, pick her up, hold her, run. She looked away. Get her out of my sight, she said. Tonight. 3 hours later, at 2:14 a.m., a black Lincoln Town car pulled out of the Hayes estate and disappeared into the worst storm Atlanta had seen that decade. The rain wasn't falling. It was attacking, horizontal sheets of it that turned the world into a gray, howling blur. The temperature had dropped to 26 degrees. There was a freeze warning. There was ice already forming on the bridges. Victoria was in the back seat, alone, with a car seat beside her. A plain gray second-hand car seat she had bought in cash at a Target in Chamblee 4 days earlier at 2 a.m., wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. In the car seat was a baby girl, wrapped in a single thin hospital blanket. Not the cashmere receiving blanket Victoria had originally purchased, no. She had returned that one the next morning, receipt and all, because the thought of something that soft touching the baby's skin while she sent her away had made her physically ill. So the blanket was thin. Hospital issue. The kind they put on babies they don't expect to keep. The driver, a man named Hollis, who had been with the family for 19 years and who did not ask questions because asking questions in the Hayes household was a fast way to be replaced by someone who wouldn't, drove in silence. He did not look in the rearview mirror. He did not want to know. The destination was a fire station on the outskirts of DeKalb County. Volunteer station, old building, brick, one bay door, perpetually rusted. It had been a deliberate choice. Not a hospital, not a church, not a place that asked too many questions. A fire station, anonymous. The kind of place where people left things they couldn't carry anymore. Victoria got out of the car. She did not take the baby out of the car seat. She simply unbuckled the car seat, lifted it, all 18 pounds of her, this impossible, unbearable weight, and carried it to the front step. The rain had turned to sleet. The sleet hit the baby's face, and the baby's face screwed up. And the baby began to cry, and the cry was so small and so angry and so alive that Victoria's hands actually began to shake. She set the car seat down. She looked at the baby. The baby looked at her. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And she didn't mean it. Not the way a mother means it. Not the way a person means it when they truly understand what they've done. She meant it the way a person means it when they spill red wine on a white rug. She meant it as an apology for the inconvenience. She did not mean it as a confession of murder. And that, more than anything else, is the detail that should make you hate her. She turned. She walked back to the car. She got in. She closed the door. "Drive," she said. Hollis drove. As they pulled away, Victoria allowed herself one look in the rearview mirror. The car seat was a small, dark shape getting smaller in the sleet. The baby was still crying. Victoria could still hear it, faintly, like a mosquito at the edge of hearing. "I'll never think of this again," she said, mostly to herself. Never. This never happened. She would carry that sentence to the grave. Or so she thought. Because what Victoria did not know, what she could not have known, what would have stopped her cold if she had, was that the volunteer fireman on duty that night, a 63-year-old black man named Ezra Whitfield, had heard the car pull up. He had watched from the window. He had seen the Lincoln. He had seen the silhouette of the woman. And when he opened the door 2 minutes later and picked up that freezing, screaming baby out of the car seat, he had looked at the blanket, and tucked into the fold of that thin hospital blanket, almost invisible, was a small silver medallion on a chain. He had logged it into the report. Item found on infant. One silver medallion. Monogrammed. Letters. VA. He did not know what it meant, but he kept it. He would keep it safe. And 27 years later, he would hand it to a young woman in a cap and gown with tears in his eyes and tell her, "Girl, I don't know where you came from, but somebody, somewhere, wanted you to find your way back. But that is a long way off. For now, the Lincoln disappears into the storm. The baby's cry fades. The fire station light buzzes yellow in the sleet. And somewhere, miles away, in a master bedroom that smells of lilies and lies, a woman climbs into bed beside an empty pillow, pulls the duvet up to her chin, and forces herself to sleep. She sleeps like the dead. She always has. 27 years. I want you to feel that number. I want you to sit with it. 27 years of Victoria Ashford Hayes walking through the world as a woman with one daughter. 27 Thanksgivings with one chair at the children's table. 27 birthday cakes with one name and icing. 27 years of looking at her daughter Charlotte's face, her porcelain blue-eyed Hayes-jawed daughter, and swallowing the truth like a stone. Charlotte Hayes grew up the way children of old Atlanta money are designed to grow up. Private school, riding lessons, a first car at 16, a white Range Rover, paid for in full, wrapped in a blue bow in the driveway, with a note from Daddy that said, "Drive safe, Princess. The world is yours." She went to Vanderbilt, then to a 2-year program in Paris. For the culture, her mother said, though Victoria herself had never read a book that wasn't a society column. Charlotte studied interior design. She came back with a French accent she couldn't quite shake, and a flat in Buckhead her parents bought her as a graduation present. She was beautiful. She was soft. She was protected, not just by wealth, but by a kind of bubble-wrapped ignorance that only the very rich can afford. Charlotte believed the world was fundamentally kind. She believed people were fundamentally good. She believed her mother when her mother said, "You are my only daughter, Charlotte. You are everything I ever wanted." And she never, ever asked why her mother sometimes stared at her for too long, why her mother sometimes, in certain lights, seemed to be looking through her, why her mother flinched at green eyes. She never asked, because nobody ever taught her there was something to ask. And meanwhile, miles away, in a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Atlanta, in a neighborhood where the streetlights didn't all work and the bus only ran every 45 minutes, a different girl was growing up in a completely different country. A country that existed in the same city, that used the same water, that breathed the same air, but that was, in every other way imaginable, a world away from Buckhead. Her name was Maya Whitfield, and she had been Maya Whitfield since she was 4 years old, when a woman named Lorraine Whitfield, a 46-year-old charge nurse at Grady Memorial, divorced, no children of her own, with a laugh that could fill a hallway and hands that could soothe a colicky baby in under 3 minutes, had walked into a county social services office in DeKalb County and said, "I want that one." That one was a 3-year-old girl with dark brown skin, a wispy halo of curls, and eyes so green they looked like someone had stuck 2 pieces of sea glass into a mahogany doll. She had been in 3 foster homes already. She didn't talk much. She didn't cry much. She just watched the other kids get picked up, watched the caseworkers come and go, watched the world rearrange itself around her with the patient, wary stillness of a cat by a window. Lorraine had knelt down, looked her in the eye, and said, "Hi, baby. I'm going to take you home. Is that okay with you?" Maya had looked at her for a long time. Then she had reached up and put one small, sticky hand on Lorraine's cheek. Lorraine had burst into tears right there in the office. She signed the papers that afternoon. And that is the difference between the 2 women who raised these girls. Victoria arranged. Lorraine showed up. Maya grew up loved. I want to be very clear about that. She grew up loved the way children are loved when love is not a performance, but a practice. Daily, unglamorous, sometimes tired, always real. Lorraine worked doubles. She worked nights. She missed holidays sometimes because a patient was crashing, and Maya was the only one who understood. Maya learned to make her own lunch at 6 years old. She learned to do her own laundry at 8. She learned by the time she was 10 that responsible was not a word for adults. It was a requirement for children of single mothers, and she wore the word like a backpack she never took off. But she also learned to read out loud while her mother did the dishes, the 2 of them making up dramatic voices for the characters, Lorraine hamming it up until Maya was crying with laughter. She learned to dance in the kitchen to old Anita Baker records on Saturday mornings, Lorraine pretending to be Beyoncé and Maya pretending to be embarrassed, and the 2 of them collapsing on the linoleum in a heap of giggles. She learned what it felt like to be chosen, not because of her name, not because of her blood, not because of what she could do for someone, but simply because she was. Maya never forgot that she was adopted. Lorraine had told her early, plainly, with no euphemism. "You were left somewhere, baby, and somebody found you. And I am so, so glad they did, because now you're mine." Maya had nodded, serious, the way small children are serious about things they understand better than adults. "Okay," she had said. "Do we have to talk about it again?" "Not unless you want to." "I don't want to." And for a long time, she didn't. She threw herself into school. She got a job at 16, hostess at a Waffle House, then a server at a Cracker Barrel, then a CNA at a nursing home, where she was the only black girl on staff, and where the old white ladies in Unit B called her Sweetie and Honey, and once, memorably, the colored girl. And Maya smiled through every single one of them because her mother had told her, "Baby, you don't have to let them make you small." She put herself through nursing school at Georgia State. She graduated cum laude. She got a job at Emory University Hospital in the transplant unit because Maya had known since she was 11 years old and watched Lorraine hold a dying man's hand in a hospice room until his family arrived that she was meant to be in rooms where people were at their most broken. And on the day of her graduation, Lorraine did something she had been waiting 23 years to do. She sat Maya down at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Maya had learned to read, where they had danced to Anita Baker, where Lorraine had once cried into a glass of wine on Maya's 16th birthday because she couldn't afford the prom dress Maya had wanted, and she placed a small, flat box in front of her daughter. "Open it," Lorraine said. Maya opened it. Inside, on a square of faded blue velvet, was a silver medallion on a thin chain. The medallion was old. The silver was tarnished. But the engraving was clear even after all these years. A monogram. 2 letters intertwined. VA. "This was with you," Lorraine said, her voice thick. "On the night you were found. The fireman, Ezra, Mr. Whitfield, he's the one who found you, the one who found me when I was looking to adopt. He kept it for you. All this time. He gave it to me the day I signed the papers. Said he figured one day you'd want it. Said it was the only thing that proved you came from somewhere." Maya stared at the medallion. Her fingers were trembling. VA, 2 letters. She didn't know what they meant. Not yet. But the weight of them, the gravity of them, settled into her chest like a stone dropped into deep water. She put the medallion on. She never took it off. And somewhere across the city, in a powder room at a charity luncheon, Victoria Ashford Hayes, who had just smiled for a photograph with the governor's wife, felt a sudden, inexplicable chill run down her spine. She wrapped her shawl tighter. She took a sip of her champagne. She forgot about it by the time she reached for the crab puffs, but the medallion remembered. Oh, the medallion remembered. Now. The night everything changed. It was a Tuesday. A stupid Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday where nothing is supposed to happen. The kind of Tuesday that exists specifically so that the universe can use it as a punchline. Charlotte Hayes, 26 years old, golden-haired, blue-eyed, recently engaged to a stockbroker named Trevor, who had a kind face and a mediocre personality, was driving home from a yoga class in Midtown at 9:47 p.m. on a road she had driven 1,000 times. It had rained earlier. The road was wet. A deer, a stupid deer with a brain the size of a walnut and a death wish the size of Texas, stepped out from the median. Charlotte swerved. The car hit the guardrail at 53 miles per hour. The car did not hit the deer. The car hit the world. The jaws of life took 40 minutes to cut her out. The ambulance code was a 1050. The EMT in the back was a young man named Kenny, 24 years old, 6 months on the job, and he would later tell his girlfriend, "I have never in my life seen that much blood look that clean." Charlotte's face was almost untouched. The rest of her was a disaster. She arrived at Emory at 11:02 p.m., Trauma 1. The surgical team was waiting. The damage list was a paragraph of horrors: broken pelvis, shattered left femur, collapsed right lung, 3 cracked ribs, internal bleeding controlled but ongoing. And this was the part that mattered, the part that would rearrange the universe. Both kidneys destroyed. Not damaged, not bruised, destroyed. Crushed in the impact, the way a watermelon is crushed under a truck tire. Inoperable. Irreversible. Charlotte Hayes, 26 years old, with a French accent she was still trying to shake, and a wedding registry on Zola she was supposed to finish the next morning, was now a person whose blood was slowly filling with the poison her kidneys could no longer filter out. She was placed on dialysis, She was placed on life support. She was placed on a list. And Victoria arrived at the hospital at 11:34 p.m. in a cashmere coat, screaming. I want you to hear this. I want you to hear what it sounds like when a wealthy white woman screams in an Atlanta emergency room at midnight, because it is a different scream than the one that was heard on a fire station doorstep 27 years ago. That one was small. This one was operational. This one came with lawyers, with demands, with threats of lawsuits, with a hospital administrator named Mr. Pemberton, who appeared within 15 minutes because Victoria Ashford Hayes was, as he put it to the charge nurse, a major donor to this institution, and we want to be sure she feels supported. Supported, the charge nurse muttered under her breath, a black woman named Gloria, who had been at Emory for 22 years and who had seen every version of rich white people's grief. Honey, what she wants is a miracle, and the doctors gave her the truth, which is the cruelest thing a hospital can give. Mrs. Hayes, Charlotte is stable, but she has end-stage renal failure. Without a transplant, she has weeks, possibly less. Her name will go on the UNOS list, but the average wait time for a kidney in Georgia is 3 to 5 years. We can keep her alive on dialysis in the interim, but her quality of life will deteriorate significantly. The best option by far is a living donor. Then test me, Victoria said instantly. Test Reggie, test everyone. They did. The next day, in a quiet, climate-controlled lab on the 3rd floor of Emory's transplant wing, a technician named Priya ran the HLA typing on Victoria, on Reggie, who had taken the first flight from London and arrived looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours, and on Trevor, the fiancé, who showed up with his shirt on inside out. None of them matched, not even close. Charlotte's HLA markers were, in the words of Dr. Boudreau, the lead nephrologist, extraordinarily rare. She had a combination of antigens that occurs in roughly 1 in 12,000 people of Northern European descent and 1 in 40,000 of African descent. The lab flagged it. The lab called it needle in a haystack. The lab said, very gently, that they would widen the search to the National Registry, but that the prognosis was not optimistic. Victoria did not accept this. Victoria had never accepted anything in her life that she could not buy, threaten, or charm her way out of. And so, on Thursday morning, 3 days after the accident, Victoria did what Victoria did best. She weaponized her money. A press release went out under the Hayes Family Foundation letterhead. $1 million. $1 million, tax-free, no questions asked, to any living donor who passed the genetic compatibility test for Charlotte Hayes. The story ran on every local affiliate. It ran on CNN. It ran, briefly, on a segment of the Today Show that Victoria's publicist had paid for in cash. People flooded the transplant coordinator's voicemail. The line was jammed for 9 days straight. Not one of them matched, not one. And Victoria, for the first time in her life, for the first time in her pampered, gold-plated, bulletproof life, began to understand what it felt like to be powerless. It felt, she would later tell her therapist, yes, she had a therapist 3 times a week, $400 a session, and God bless that woman for the patience. Like being buried alive, like the walls of the room she was standing in were closing in, inch by inch, while her daughter lay in a hospital bed with a tube down her throat and a clock counting down to a number Victoria could not bear to look at. How long? Victoria asked Dr. Boudreau, on day 12, in a voice so flat it sounded like a floor. With aggressive dialysis, 3 to 4 weeks, maybe 5. After that, her body will begin to fail in ways we cannot reverse. Victoria closed her eyes. Her hands, folded in her lap, were shaking so badly her rings were clicking against each other. Click, 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 like a metronome counting down to something none of them were ready for. And then, and this is the moment, the hinge, the place where the story turns on a dime. In a quiet corner of the same hospital, on the transplant unit, on the same floor where Charlotte Hayes lay dying, a young nurse was doing chart audits. Her name was Maya Whitfield. She had been at Emory for 2 years. She was good at her job. Too good, the kind of good that made older nurses roll their eyes and younger nurses resent her, because Maya had the cursed talent of caring more than was professional. She brought homemade soup to her long-term patients. She learned the names of their grandchildren. She sat with the dying ones when the families didn't show up. She had been told more than once by her charge nurse, "Maya, you can't save them all." And Maya always said, "I know, Gloria. I'm just trying to be there for the ones I can." Tonight, she was auditing charts for the unit coordinator, cross-referencing incoming labs with active transplant candidates, looking for potential matches, because every now and then, in a hospital this size, the math worked out. A patient came in for something unrelated. A blood test got drawn, and the antigens, against all odds, lined up like a slot machine in Vegas. Maya was 3 charts deep into a stack of post-op patients when she pulled up Charlotte Hayes' file. She didn't know who Charlotte Hayes was. She didn't know the name Hayes. She didn't know about the $1 million or the press release or the fact that the governor's wife had sent flowers. All she saw was a name, a blood type, and an HLA panel. She looked at the panel. She looked at the panel again. Her hand, holding the mouse, went still. Oh my God, she knew her own HLA markers. Every nurse on the transplant unit knew their own markers. It was a small professional vanity, the way a pianist knows their own fingerprints. And Charlotte Hayes' markers, this extraordinarily rare 1 in 40,000 set of markers, were sitting on the screen looking back at Maya like a mirror. A perfect match, 6 out of 6 antigens. Maya sat back in her chair. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Her hands were trembling. The chart on the screen in front of her was a dying woman she had never met. The silver medallion around her neck, the one she hadn't taken off in 4 years, suddenly felt heavy. Heavy in a way that pressed against her collarbone like a question she wasn't ready to answer. She didn't know yet that Charlotte Hayes was her sister. She didn't know yet that the woman in the waiting room with the cashmere coat was her mother. She didn't know yet that the two of them were connected by a sin that had been committed on a fire station doorstep in 1999. All she knew in that moment was that somewhere on her floor, a young woman was dying. And Maya, by the random, brutal, unsentimental mathematics of genetics, was the only person in the state of Georgia, maybe in the country, who could save her. She took a breath. She closed the chart. She opened it again. The match was still there. It was, she thought, the loneliest number she had ever seen. And in a private suite on the 8th floor, with a window that looked out over the Atlanta skyline she had paid property taxes on for 2 decades, Victoria Ashford Hayes, who had not slept in 13 days, who had lost 9 pounds, who had begun in the small hours of the morning to talk to a God she hadn't spoken to in 30 years, was dialing a number she had deleted from her phone 6 years after the incident. David Mercer's number. Because the man whose child she had abandoned, that man's child, the one with the green eyes, the one she had left to freeze on a doorstep in DeKalb County, might, just might, if the math was as cruel as she suspected it was, be the only genetic relative on Earth who could save her real daughter. She let the phone ring. And ring, and ring. David Mercer did not answer. He had changed his number years ago, as artists often do, drifting through periods of productivity and silence like a man walking through fog. He did not know he had a daughter. He did not know that his daughter was a nurse at Emory. He did not know that his daughter's blood type, that beautiful, rare, green-eyed combination of his and Victoria's, was the only thing standing between a stranger named Charlotte Hayes and a death that would arrive in 3 to 4 weeks, give or take. The phone rang into voicemail. Victoria stared at the screen. Her face, in the reflection of the dark window, looked like something out of a crime drama. Hollow, gaunt, unrecognizable. And in the transplant unit 3 floors down, Maya was making a decision. She did not make it quickly. I want you to understand that. She did not make it in a moment of drama, with swelling music and a single heroic tear. She made it the way real decisions are made by real people, slowly, badly, in pieces, with long pauses in hospital hallways and cold coffee in styrofoam cups, and the sound of her mother's voice in her head saying, "Baby, the world is going to hand you reasons to harden your heart. Don't take them." She called Lorraine first. At 2:13 a.m., Lorraine answered on the second ring, because Lorraine was the kind of mother who slept with the phone on her chest. "Maya, Baby, what's wrong? Maya told her. All of it. The chart, the match, the young woman upstairs, the $1 million reward she hadn't even known about until today when the charge nurse mentioned it at shift change. The green eyes, the medallion, the 2 letters she had stared at for 4 years without understanding them. Maya, Lorraine said, very quietly, after a long silence. Are you sure? I'm sure, Mama. 6 out of 6. And the family, you don't know who they are? I know they're rich. I know they're white. I know the daughter's name is Charlotte, and she's 26, and she was in a car accident, and she's dying. I don't know anything else. Another silence, the longest silence of Maya's life. Then Lorraine said, Baby, you don't owe that girl anything. You don't owe that family anything. Whoever they are, whatever they did or didn't do, that is not your debt. You hear me? You are not a debt. I know, Mama. You are not a sacrifice. You are not a transaction. You are my daughter, and I did not raise you to lie down on a table for strangers. Maya closed her eyes. She could feel the tears sliding down her cheeks, hot and slow. Mama, she said, if I don't do it, she dies. If I don't do it, in 3 weeks, a girl my age, a girl who has my face, who has my blood, dies. And I have to live the rest of my life knowing I could have stopped it. Can you live with that? Can I? The line was quiet for so long, Maya thought they'd been disconnected. Then Lorraine, in a voice that sounded like it was being pulled out of her chest with a hook, said, Then do it, baby. Do it with grace, and call me the second you're out of recovery. Maya hung up. She sat in the break room for another 20 minutes. Then she walked down the hall to the transplant coordinator's office. A woman named Sandra, 60 years old, silver-haired, no nonsense, who had been matching donors to recipients for longer than Maya had been alive. Maya sat in the plastic chair across from Sandra's desk. She placed her badge on the table. She placed her ID on the table. She placed next to it the silver medallion, which she had unclasped from her neck for the first time in 4 years. I want to be tested, Maya said. I want to donate. Anonymous. Strictly anonymous. I don't want the family to know who I am, where I am, or how to reach me. I want this to be a clean gift. No strings, no debt, no name. Sandra looked at her for a long moment. You understand the risks? I'm a transplant nurse, Sandra. I know the risks better than most surgeons. And the family, they have money, honey. A lot of money. They're going to want to know you. I don't want to be known. I want to save a life. That's all. Sandra nodded slowly. She picked up the phone. She made 3 calls. The next morning, Maya was tested. The day after that, the results came back. Perfect match. 6 of 6. Eligible. No contraindications. A surgery date was set for 9 days later. Victoria was told only that a compatible donor had been found. She was not told the donor's name, gender, race, or anything else. She was told, in the careful, neutral language of hospital administrators, that the donor had requested complete confidentiality. And Victoria, who had spent her entire life demanding to know everything, controlling everything, owning everything, was forced, for the first time, to sit in a waiting room and trust. She did not handle it well. The surgery was performed on a Wednesday. Maya was in pre-op at 6 a.m. Lorraine was at her bedside, holding her hand, whispering a prayer Maya had heard 1,000 times. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. The same prayer she had whispered when Maya was 4 years old and afraid of the dark. Maya squeezed her hand. Mama, I'm scared. I know, baby. Be scared. Be scared and do it anyway. That's what brave is. The anesthesia took her under at 7:14 a.m. The surgery lasted 3 hours and 47 minutes. A surgical team led by Dr. Boudreau, one of the best transplant surgeons in the Southeast, removed Maya's left kidney through a laparoscopic procedure and wheeled it, on ice, 3 floors up, to Charlotte Hayes OR. The transplant itself took 2 more hours. The kidney, once reconnected, pinked up immediately. The technical term for the moment a transplanted organ begins to function in its new body. Charlotte's urine output, which had been negligible for days, suddenly resumed. Her vitals stabilized. Her color, which had been the color of old paper, began to return. The surgery was, in the words of Dr. Boudreau, Textbook. Charlotte woke up at 4:30 p.m. The first thing she said, in a voice like crushed velvet, was, "Mama." Victoria was there. Of course she was there. She had been sitting in that waiting room for 9 hours without eating, without drinking, without blinking. When she heard her daughter's voice, she made a sound that the nurses would later describe as not a word exactly, more like something breaking open. The kidney worked. It worked beautifully. And for 4 days, Victoria basked in the warm, almost narcotic relief of a crisis averted. She sent the hospital's transplant wing a check for $200,000. She sent Dr. Boudreau's office a check for $50,000. She sent the nurses a catered lunch from Bacchanalia, the most expensive restaurant in Atlanta, with a note that said, "Thank you for saving my daughter. You are angels." She cried at her kitchen table, alone, with a glass of wine and the photo album of Charlotte's childhood, and told God out loud that she would be a better person now. She would do better. She would volunteer. She would donate. She would find a way to make this mean something. And then, on the 5th day, the obsession began. "Who is the donor?" she asked Sandra, the transplant coordinator. "Mrs. Hayes, the donor has requested anonymity." "I don't care what the donor requested. Who is the donor?" "I have a right to know. My daughter is alive because of this person. My family owes them a debt of gratitude. I will not have a nameless stranger holding this over us. I want a name. I want an address. I want to look them in the eye and say thank you." Sandra, who had been doing this job for 28 years and who had seen every variety of donor-recipient collision, kept her voice level. "Mrs. Hayes, the legal documents the donor signed explicitly forbid the disclosure of their identity. I cannot and will not give you that information, not today, not next week, not ever, unless the donor themselves chooses to waive their anonymity. I'm sorry." Victoria left Sandra's office furious. She left the hospital furious. She spent the next 2 days calling her lawyer, calling the hospital's legal department, calling the head of the transplant program, calling the CEO of Emory's hospital network, calling anyone with a title and a phone number. She threatened lawsuits. She threatened to pull the Hayes Foundation's annual gift, a cool $4.2 million through, which was, she made sure to point out, not an insignificant line item in your budget, Mr. Pemberton. And on the 7th day, after Sandra had held the line like a woman holding a door against a hurricane, Victoria did what Victoria had always done when the system refused to give her what she wanted. She cheated. She hired a private investigator, a man named Cyrus Webb, ex-FBI, $600 an hour, who specialized in hard-to-find persons. And in 48 hours, because Cyrus Webb was very good at his job, and because hospitals, despite HIPAA, are leaky boats, he came back to Victoria with a name. Maya Whitfield, 27, registered nurse, transplant unit, black female, single, no children, admitted to Emory 9 days ago for an elective laparoscopic nephrectomy. Discharged after 2 days, currently on medical leave at an address in southwest Atlanta. Victoria stared at the file. She stared at the photograph. A young black woman smiling in scrubs with her arm around an older black woman who looked like her mother. Green eyes, unmistakably green. The same green as David Mercer's. The same green as the baby on the doorstep. The medallion. The hair on the back of Victoria's neck stood up. "No," she whispered. She picked up the phone. She called a friend at the Atlanta History Center. She asked very quietly, very carefully, if there were any old Ashford family records, silver pieces, jewelry, monogrammed items that might have gone missing in the late 1990s. The friend said, yes, of course. There was one piece, a silver christening medallion, monogrammed VA, that had belonged to Victoria's grandmother, that had disappeared around the time of, and here the friend paused, around the time of the incident, wasn't it? We never spoke of it. We were told not to. Victoria hung up. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She reached without looking for the bottle of Pinot on the counter, poured a glass, and drank it in one swallow. It didn't help. Nothing helped. She knew. With the bone-deep, marrow-certain knowledge of a woman who has spent 27 years trying to bury a thing and has just heard it tap, quietly, on the coffin lid. She knew. The donor. The anonymous donor. The perfect match. The baby on the fire station doorstep. It was the same girl. Maya was in her hospital room, a small private room on the 7th floor, recovering, watching, the Price is Right with the sound off, because her roommate had gone home, and she liked the colors. When Victoria Ashford Hayes walked in without knocking, no flowers this time, no card, no catered lunch from Bacchanalia, just Victoria in a black cashmere coat, her hair pulled back so tight it looked like her face was being winched into place, and in her right hand, a thick manila envelope. "Get out," Maya said before Victoria could speak. Not a request, a command, the voice of a woman who had been underestimated her entire life and was done with it. Victoria did not get out. Victoria, who had never in her life been told to get out of a room, stood in the doorway and stared at the young woman in the bed, at the green eyes, at the dark brown skin, at the silver medallion which Maya had put back on that morning, as if she had known. Victoria swallowed. "I want to thank you," she began, the rehearsed speech already unfolding, "for what you did for my daughter. The Hayes family is in your debt. We are prepared to offer a substantial sum, a very substantial sum, to express our gratitude, $50,000, cash, no questions, no expectations, just our thanks and our desire to ensure that you are compensated for your generosity." She held out the envelope. Her hand was steady now. She had practiced this speech in the mirror 3 times. She had the tone just right. Gracious, grateful, generous. The lady of the house rewarding a servant for service well rendered. Maya looked at the envelope. Maya looked at Victoria. Maya, very slowly, sat up in bed. The heart monitor, which had been beeping steadily, suddenly quickened. Beep, 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 beep. Not in panic, in recognition. In the kind of recognition that happens between 2 bodies that share a single, hidden, half-buried strand of DNA. A recognition that lives in the bone, in the blood, in the strange, stubborn architecture of cells that remember what the mind has tried to forget. "Put the envelope down," Maya said. Her voice was low. "And close the door." Victoria, for the first time in this story, did as she was told. The door clicked shut. The room, suddenly, felt very small. "I know who you are," Maya said. Victoria's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I know who you are, Victoria Ashford Hayes. I've known since I was 4 years old that I was left somewhere. I didn't know where. I didn't know by whom. I didn't know why." She reached up and unclasped the silver medallion from her neck. She held it out, the way a lawyer holds up evidence. "But I knew this was mine. And I knew, the moment I read your daughter's chart, that the VA on this medallion stood for Victoria Ashford." The blood drained from Victoria's face like water from a sink. She actually took a step backward. Her shoulder hit the door. The envelope fell from her hand and hit the floor, and $50,000 in $100 bills fanned out across the linoleum like a deck of cards in a game nobody wanted to play. "I didn't give her my kidney for you," Maya said, and her voice, the voice that had been low, controlled, professional, began to crack. "I did it because she is my sister. The one you left to freeze on a fire station doorstep 27 years ago. The one you pretended didn't exist. The one you erased so you could keep your pearls and your house and your name. Don't." Maya's voice snapped like a wire. "Don't you dare give me a reason. Don't you dare stand in that doorway and tell me you were scared. Tell me you were young. Tell me you did what you thought was best. I have heard every excuse in the world from women like you, and I am not interested. I am interested in one thing. I want to know why." The room was silent except for the heart monitor, which was screaming now, both of them. 2 women on opposite sides of a door that had been closed for 27 years, finally inside the same room, finally looking at each other without the buffer of money or class or the color of their skin. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I was afraid," she said. "Of what?" "Of everything." And the word broke her. The word broke her the way the word had been waiting 27 years to break her. Not with a sound, not with a sob, but with a shudder that started in her chest and moved through her body like an earthquake. "I was afraid of my husband. I was afraid of my family. I was afraid of the country. I was afraid of what people would say. I was afraid of losing everything. And I had a baby in my arms who was beautiful, who was perfect, who had your father's eyes and your father's soul, and I looked at her, and I saw ruin. I saw the end of my life. I saw my name in a tabloid. I saw my marriage in a dumpster, and I made a choice. I made a coward's choice, and I have lived with it every single day since. The tears were coming now. Not delicate tears, not socialite tears. These were the tears of a woman who had just been run over by a truck she had spent 27 years pretending was a parked car. "I deserve this," Victoria whispered. "I deserve every second of this. I know I do." And then, from the doorway, a doorway neither of them had noticed opening, came a voice. Weak, hoarse, unmistakable. "She doesn't have to tell me, Mother." Charlotte Hayes was standing in the doorway, supported by Trevor, her hospital gown hanging off her shoulders, her IV stand rattling against the doorframe, her post-op face pale as paper, her eyes blue, not green, not David's green, but Victoria's eyes. The eyes of the daughter who had been kept, fixed on her mother with the cold, clear, unforgiving gaze of a woman who has just heard the truth and understood in one single, devastating instant exactly what kind of woman raised her. "I heard everything," Charlotte said. The heart monitor, somewhere in the room, flatlined for one terrifying second. Then it caught. Then it beeped. Beep, beep, beep. And Victoria Ashford Hayes, who had spent her entire life arranging things, controlling things, owning things, sank to the linoleum floor of a hospital room she did not own, in a building she had not built, in front of a daughter whose kidney was beating inside the body of a sister she had never met. And she broke. Not gracefully, not cinematically. She broke the way real women break, in pieces, in public, with mascara running down her chin, and her carefully pinned hair falling into her eyes, and her hands over her face, and a sound coming out of her throat that wasn't a word at all, but a wail. The kind of sound that nurses recognize and that doctors pause for, and that hospital chaplains hear and know, with the certainty of men who have stood at the edges of many deaths, that this is the sound of a life that has just ended and begun at the same time. She did not ask for forgiveness. She was not capable of asking for forgiveness. Forgiveness in that room, in that moment, would have been an insult, a get-out-of-jail card for a crime that had no jail big enough to hold it. What she did instead was confess, fully, completely, with no exits, no qualifiers, no buts. She told Charlotte about the affair. She told Charlotte about David. She told Charlotte about the fire station, the car seat, the sleet, the drive home, the way she had forced herself to sleep. She told Charlotte the truth, the whole truth, the truth she had spent 27 years trying to make untrue, and the truth was so much worse than anyone in the room had imagined, because the truth was not that Victoria had been cruel. The truth was that Victoria had been ordinary, selfish, human. The truth was that Victoria was not a monster. The truth was that Victoria was a woman who had been given a choice and who had chosen wrong and who had spent every day since then trying to convince herself that the wrong choice had been the only one. Maya sat on the bed and listened. She did not interrupt. She did not forgive. She did not rage. She just listened with the silver medallion in her palm and her green eyes. David's green eyes. The eyes Victoria had tried to forget. The eyes that had stared up at her from a car seat in a sleet storm 27 years ago. Open and dry. Not because she wasn't feeling anything, because she was feeling everything, and she had decided in that room, in that moment, that the only power she wanted was the power to let Victoria feel it too. And Charlotte, who was only 6 days post-transplant, who was supposed to be in bed, who was forbidden from walking more than 50 feet, who had heard every word of her mother's confession from a hallway chair where Trevor had wheeled her, because Charlotte had insisted, because Charlotte had known, the way sisters know, the way blood knows, that something was happening on the 7th floor that she needed to see. Charlotte looked at Maya. Charlotte looked at Maya for a long time. Then she looked at the IV stand, which was trembling, and the hospital bracelet on her wrist, which had a barcode, and the kidney somewhere inside her. Maya's kidney. A piece of a sister she had never met, a piece of a woman who had chosen to save her, who had walked into a transplant coordinator's office and said, "I want to give this girl a chance." And Charlotte, very slowly, walked to the bed. She took Maya's hand. She held it. She did not say anything. She just held it. And Maya, after a long moment, held it back. And Victoria, on the floor, watched the two of them. The two daughters she had made, the one she had kept, and the one she had thrown away, holding hands across a distance that had taken 27 years to cross. And she understood. Finally, the thing she had not understood on the fire station doorstep, the thing she had not understood in 27 years of expensive therapy and 3 times a week of 400-hour conversations, the thing she had been running from since the night the sleet hit the baby's face, and the baby's face screwed up and the baby began to cry. She understood that the love you throw away does not disappear. It waits. It waits in foster homes and in tenement apartments and in the lap of a charge nurse named Lorraine. It waits in a graduation cap and a silver medallion. It waits in a chart on a computer screen and a match that should not have been possible. It waits in a hospital bed on a Tuesday morning with an IV in its arm and a heart monitor singing a song that is finally in tune. It waits, and it waits, and it waits. And then, one day, it shows up, not to accuse, not to punish, not to collect, but to give you the one thing you do not deserve and cannot repay, to give you a kidney when your daughter is dying, to give you a sister when you have spent 27 years pretending she doesn't exist, to give you truth in a room you do not own, on a floor you did not build, at a moment you cannot control. And the only appropriate response, the only response that honors the gift, is to get down on your knees, to stay down, and to weep. Weep, that's the word. Not apologize, not explain, not negotiate, weep. Because some debts cannot be settled with $50,000 in a manila envelope. Some debts cannot be settled with checks to hospitals or catered lunches from Bacchanalia or even, and I want you to hear this, with forgiveness. Because the debt Victoria owed Maya was not a debt of money. It was a debt of presence. It was the debt of a mother who owed her daughter a childhood, a name, a Christmas morning, a kitchen dance to Anita Baker, a hand to hold in the dark, a story about where she came from. It was the debt of a woman who had 27 years of her daughter's life to pay back and who did not have 27 years left to pay it. That is the kind of debt that breaks a person. That is the kind of debt that should break a person. Because if it doesn't break you, you didn't really understand what you did. And the lesson, the real lesson, the one I want you to take with you tonight, the one I want you to carry into your kitchen and your car and your bed and your life, is not the lesson that karma is cruel. The lesson is not that Victoria got what she deserved. The lesson is not that money can't buy you out of everything. Those are cheap lessons. Those are lessons that make us feel righteous for 10 minutes and then forget. The real lesson is this: the love we discard in our youth is the love that decides our fate. Read that again. The love we discard in our youth is the love that decides our fate. Maya could have walked away. She could have closed the chart. She could have decided, I am not saving the daughter of the woman who threw me away. And she would have been right. She would have been morally, philosophically, spiritually right. But she didn't. She didn't because Lorraine raised her. She didn't because grace is a practice, not a punishment. She didn't because, somewhere in her bones, she understood the thing that Victoria was too afraid to understand at 31 and too broken to understand at 58. That blood does not lie. That the body remembers what the mind forgets. That the kidney she gave to Charlotte was not just a kidney. It was an invitation. An invitation for the Hayes family to do the one thing they had never done. To choose her back, and that is the heart of this story. Not the abandonment, not the revenge, not even the kidney. The heart of this story is the moment Charlotte held Maya's hand in room 402. Because in that moment, Charlotte chose her sister, not her mother, not her name, not her money, her sister. The sister she had never met, the sister who had given her a kidney and asked for nothing in return, the sister whose green eyes were looking back at her with a love Charlotte had never been taught to recognize in her own family. That is the power I want you to remember. Not the power of wealth, not the power of blood, the power of grace. The power of a woman who could have walked away, who should have walked away, and who instead walked in. To a hospital room, to a confrontation, to a life she did not ask for and could not have predicted and would not trade for anything in the world. That is the kind of love that decides things. That is the kind of love that settles things. Not because it forgets, not because it forgives, but because it understands finally that the only thing more powerful than the wound is the willingness to heal it. Victoria's perfect marriage did not end in a courtroom. It ended on a hospital floor. Her social standing did not fall because of a tabloid. It fell because her own daughter looked at her and said, "I heard everything." Her wealth did not save her. Her name did not save her. Nothing saved her. And that is the point. Nothing was meant to save her. She was not the hero of this story. She was never the hero. She was the obstacle. The obstacle that love walked around, the way water walks around a stone, the way light walks around a wall, patient, persistent, certain. Maya is the hero. Maya has always been the hero. From the moment she was found on a doorstep, screaming in the sleet, she was the hero of her own life. From the moment Lorraine knelt down and said, "Hi, baby, I'm going to take you home." From the moment she put the medallion on and didn't take it off. From the moment she walked into Sandra's office and said, "I want to give this girl a chance." She was the hero because she chose to be. Not because of her skin, not because of her adoption, not because of her blood, because of her character, because of the kind of woman Lorraine raised her to be, because of the kind of woman David Mercer, the pianist she had never met, would have been proud of. And if you are listening to this tonight and you have ever been left somewhere, left on a doorstep, left in a hospital room, left in a marriage, left in a life that did not want you, I want you to hear me. You are not the thing that was left. You are the person who was found. You are the person who was chosen, not by the ones who left you, by the ones who stayed, by the Lorraines, by the Ezras, by the Sandras, by the ordinary, unglamorous, sometimes tired, always real people who showed up and said, "I want that one." You are the kidney, the gift, the grace, and the only appropriate response to that, the only response that honors what you've been given, is to give it back. To somebody, to anybody, without an envelope, without a contract, without a name, just a hand held out in a room you do not own, at a moment you cannot control, to a stranger who will become in the space of a single breath the most important person in your life. That is what Maya did. That is what we are all, in our own way, asked to do. Not to forget what was done to us. Not to forgive what cannot be forgiven, but to give anyway, gracefully, repeatedly, with both hands and a full heart and a steady voice. That is the lesson. That is the only lesson. Blood does not lie, but grace speaks louder. Thank you for staying with me through this one, 40 minutes. I know. But this story, this particular story, was not a story that could be told quickly. Some stories cannot survive at high speed. They need the long road. They need the slow burn. They need the moments between the moments, the silences between the sentences, the long, slow, painful walk through the years that have to pass before the truth can finally be spoken out loud. And I want to ask you, and I really, really want you to tell me in the comments, if you were in Maya's place, would you have donated your kidney to save the sister who got the life you deserved? Or would you have walked away? Would you have closed the chart? Would you have let the woman who threw you away watch her golden daughter die, knowing that your silence was the only revenge you would ever need? I want to know. I genuinely, honestly want to know. Because there is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. There is only the answer that lives inside you. And the answer that lives inside you is shaped by every wound you have ever carried and every love that ever carried you. Tell me in the comments. Tell me your story. Tell me where you are and what you would have done and who you are and what brought you here tonight. I read every single comment. I read them at 2 a.m. with a cup of coffee and a feeling in my chest that I cannot describe. You are the reason this channel exists. You are the reason these stories get told. And you, yes, you, listening right now, in your kitchen, in your car, in your bed with the lights off. You are the hero of a story that I will never know the end of. If this story moved you, subscribe to Incredible Narratives. Click the bell, hit the like. Share this with somebody who needs to hear it tonight. We tell these stories, every single one, because somebody, somewhere, in the dark, needs to be reminded that they were not abandoned. They were found, and the love that found them is still looking for them. It always is. I'm going to be here next week with another story. I don't know what it is yet, but I know it will be true to the marrow. I know it will be loud. I know it will leave a mark. Until then, be kind to the people who stayed. Be gentle with the version of yourself that had to survive what should never have happened. And when you lay your head down tonight, remember, you are not the thing that was left. You are the person who was found. Good night.